The late afternoon sun bathed the Vatican gardens in a golden hue, casting long, dappled shadows over the cobbled paths and rows of ancient olive trees. It was the kind of quiet that only arrived once the crowds had gone and the cameras were off. For Pope Francis, this was a sacred hour, rare, unscheduled, and free of ceremony. He walked slowly, hands clasped behind his back, wearing his usual white cassock and a simple silver cross that gently swayed with each step. A soft breeze lifted the edges of his robe, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming jasmine and the distant hum of church bells. Occasionally he paused to admire the flowers or scribble a brief note in a small leather-bound notebook tucked under his arm. For all the global attention and responsibilities that came with his role, moments like these reminded him of simpler times, his childhood in Buenos Aires, the long walks with his grandmother, the quiet hours spent watching birds from a church bench. Now, as the spiritual leader of over 1 billion people, solitude came less easily, and peace had to be sought out intentionally. He turned a corner near a fountain shaped like a lion's head, its stream of water catching the sunlight just right. A sparrow fluttered nearby, perching on the rim, unfazed by his presence. The Pope smiled, thinking about how nature asked for nothing yet gave so much in return. The garden path ahead was empty, or so it seemed. In the distance, just beyond a row of well-manicured hedges, there was a sudden rustle. Pope Francis paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't the wind. This sound had rhythm to it. Light, quick steps. He tilted his head and waited. Then from around the bend, a small dog came bounding into view. It was scruffy, no more than medium-sized, with a coat that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. Its ears flopped as it ran, tongue hanging out, tail wagging furiously. There was no collar, no leash, just a pure burst of energy barreling straight toward him. Pope Francis blinked in surprise, but didn't move. The dog slowed as it neared, seeming to hesitate for the briefest second, then trotted up to him with the casual confidence of a longtime friend. "Well, hello," the Pope murmured, bending slightly. "And who might you be?" The dog sat at his feet, panting, as if it had been waiting all day just for this moment. Unseen by either of them, a camera lens in the distance quietly zoomed in. The small dog sat still for a moment, tongue lolling out the side of its mouth, eyes wide and expectant. Its tail tapped the grass rhythmically, as if waiting for permission to proceed. Pope Francis remained where he stood, watching the animal with quiet amusement. A gentle smile curved across his face. "You look like you've had an adventure," he said softly, kneeling down despite the stiffness in his knees. The dog inched forward, sniffed the hem of the Pope's robe, then gave it a quick, approving lick. A chuckle escaped from the Pope's lips. "You're not afraid of titles, are you?" He joked, reaching out a hand slowly. The dog didn't flinch. It leaned in eagerly and nudged his palm, pressing its head into the Pope's hand with a trust that was both surprising and strangely touching. At a distance, 2 members of the Swiss Guard exchanged a glance. They were positioned discreetly near one of the arched entrances to the garden. One of them stepped forward slightly, ready to intervene. The other held him back gently. "Let it be," the second guard whispered. "He's smiling." Indeed, Pope Francis looked more at ease than he had all week. He scratched behind the dog's ears and glanced up at the sky, where a few birds circled lazily overhead. "Where did you come from?" he asked, more to himself than to the animal. "And how did you get past the gates?" The dog, of course, gave no answer. It simply dropped to the ground and rolled onto its back, paws in the air, tail wagging even faster. The Pope laughed again, one of those rare, unguarded laughs that made the lines around his eyes deepen. Without hesitation, he reached down and gave the dog a soft belly rub. From behind a curtain of ivy on the edge of the garden, a low mechanical click sounded. A tourist perched in a high terrace beyond the Vatican walls had spotted the unusual interaction and lifted their camera phone. Zooming in carefully, they began recording. Meanwhile, Pope Francis continued to engage with his unexpected companion. "You're not just bold, you're blessed," he mused, watching the dog flop back to its feet and circle him once, tail still wagging like a flag in the wind. He rose slowly, brushing dirt from his robe. The dog stood beside him now, looking up with eyes full of trust. "All right," the Pope said gently. Let's take a walk, then." And side by side, they continued down the path, one in white robes and the other with muddy paws. The unlikely pair strolled side by side down the winding garden path, the Pope walking with his familiar calm presence, and the dog trotting confidently beside him as if it had been assigned the role of escort. There was a gentle rhythm to their pace, unhurried, almost meditative. Occasionally, the Pope glanced down, amused at how the dog would pause to sniff a flower or tilt its head at the sound of chirping birds. They reached a circular stone bench beneath a tall pine tree, its branches forming a soft canopy overhead. Pope Francis lowered himself onto the bench with a sigh, the kind that comes from quiet contentment. The dog sat at his feet, looking around alertly, ears twitching with each passing breeze. "Are you waiting for something?" the Pope asked, eyes twinkling. The dog gave a soft bark in response, just one, not too loud, more like a statement than a call. It then stood on its hind legs and placed its front paws on the Pope's lap, looking directly into his eyes. For a second, time paused. The guards nearby stiffened again, but the Pope raised a calming hand. "It's all right," he said softly, more to the guards than the dog. With a gentle hop, the dog climbed fully onto the bench. It turned once in place, then settled beside the Pope, leaning against him like an old friend seeking warmth. The Pope chuckled and instinctively rested his hand on the dog's back, stroking it slowly. The dog let out a long, satisfied sigh and closed its eyes. A light breeze rustled the leaves above them. "You're not like the dogs I've met in these gardens before," the Pope murmured. "Most keep their distance, but you walk in like you belong." The dog responded by shifting closer, resting its head against the Pope's hip. It was an image both surreal and deeply human, the world's most visible religious leader quietly sitting in the garden, petting a stray dog that had appeared out of nowhere. Across the square, the distant camera caught it all. The moment the dog climbed onto the bench, the laughter, the gentle affection, and the closeness shared between man and animal. The camera operator, a tourist who had once studied theology, whispered, "This is not something you see every day." And they were right. It wasn't staged. It wasn't planned. It was just one quiet, beautiful moment. And for Pope Francis, it was enough. He closed his eyes briefly, hands still resting on the dog, and let the silence do the speaking. While the Pope and his new companion rested beneath the pine tree, the quiet hum of Vatican life continued around them. Birds chirped, leaves danced on the wind, and somewhere beyond the walls, bells rang the hour. But above them, on a distant rooftop terrace that offered a rare view into the private gardens, 3 tourists leaned over the railing with a phone raised between them. "Is that who I think it is?" whispered a young woman in a wide-brimmed hat. Her friend adjusted the zoom on his phone. "That's definitely Pope Francis," he said, keeping his voice low. "And is that a dog sitting next to him?" They all stared, stunned. The man holding the phone began recording. The lens focused on the small dog nestled beside the Pope on the bench. From this distance, the details were soft, but the feeling was clear. The dog's tail gave a slow wag. The Pope gently patted its back, occasionally speaking to it as if they'd known each other for years. "I've never seen anything like this," the third tourist muttered. "This is so real, so human." Back in the garden, Pope Francis seemed completely unaware that he was being watched or filmed. He was focused solely on the creature beside him, who had just curled into a tighter ball and let out a sleepy yawn. The Pope smiled and spoke again, this time in Italian, his voice soft and melodic. "You remind me of the ones who come to me for blessing, not because they are powerful, but because they need to be seen." The dog responded with a slow blink, tail giving one more lazy thump against the stone bench. The moment was quiet, natural, sacred in its own way. The guards nearby had relaxed too, now watching the scene not as protectors, but as quiet witnesses to something unexpected and oddly beautiful. One of them even pulled out a discreet notepad, scribbling something quickly. He'd later describe it in a letter home as the most unplanned miracle I've ever seen. Back on the terrace, the phone continued rolling. There was no need for commentary. The footage spoke for itself. The Pope, known for his warmth and humility, looked at peace, and the dog, unnamed and free, seemed to understand that it had wandered into something rare. A moment where the world's noise fell away and two beings, one clothed in robes, the other in fur, simply shared the gift of stillness. The tourists stopped recording. They didn't need more. They already knew the world would want to see this. By the next morning, the peaceful moment between Pope Francis and the mysterious dog had become anything but private. The video captured from the terrace, only 90 seconds long, had been quietly uploaded by the tourist that evening. It was posted with a simple caption, "A moment of grace in the Vatican Gardens." There were no flashy edits, no commentary, and no dramatic music, just the sound of birds, the soft rustle of leaves, and the unmistakable warmth of a quiet connection. Within hours, the video had exploded across social media platforms. Millions of viewers clicked in, expecting perhaps another ceremonial event, but what they found was something more powerful in its simplicity. The sight of the Pope laughing gently as a scruffy, fearless dog climbed onto the bench beside him sent shockwaves of joy across the globe. "This is exactly what we needed to see today," one comment read, gathering thousands of likes. Another user wrote, "He didn't know the camera was on. That's what makes this so real." Memes were made, headlines appeared, and even news outlets that rarely covered papal activities suddenly featured the story in their top feeds. "The dog who sat with the Pope," read one headline. "Unexpected guest steals the show in Vatican Gardens," said another. As the video continued to circulate, animal shelters began sharing it to promote adoption, religious bloggers praised its symbolism, and casual viewers simply called it the most peaceful thing on the internet. People who had never paid much attention to papal life found themselves smiling over a simple act of kindness between man and animal. Even celebrities joined the chorus. A well-known actor tweeted, "Proof that compassion doesn't need words. Just watch the Pope and this dog." The post was reshared by hundreds of thousands. Some viewers began trying to identify the dog, sparking an online search through local Italian rescues and community pages. Others were more curious about the Pope's reaction, what he said, how he responded once he found out that his quiet moment had become a global sensation. But at the center of it all remained the unfiltered, unscripted beauty of what had been recorded. A man revered around the world, not in ceremony, but in stillness, with a stray dog at his side, reminding millions that sometimes the most meaningful connections are the ones we don't plan. In a digital world flooded with noise, the video offered something rare, a moment of pause. And people weren't just watching it, they were feeling it. Inside the Vatican the next morning, the usual air of formality had a faint crackle of curiosity. Several aides and advisors whispered in passing, glancing at their phones or exchanging knowing looks. Something had shifted. Even the usually unreadable expressions of the Swiss guards hinted at a shared secret. Pope Francis, finishing his morning tea, noticed the odd energy in the room. "What's all the smiling about?" he asked, setting down his cup. Monsignor Lewis, his longtime assistant, hesitated for a moment. Then he pulled out his tablet, tapped the screen, and quietly turned it toward the Pope. "There's something you should see, Your Holiness," he said with a small grin. The screen lit up with the now viral video. It played without commentary. Just the wind, the birds, and the gentle sound of laughter. The Pope watched silently as his own image appeared on the screen, sitting on the bench, petting the dog, smiling without a care in the world. He saw the dog's paws on his lap, the tail wagging, the way they moved in unison. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, watching until the very last frame. When it ended, he sat back slowly, thoughtful. Then a soft chuckle escaped his lips. "So," he said, "the world has met my friend." Monsignor Lewis looked relieved. "Yes, and they love him. The video has gone viral. Millions have seen it." Pope Francis nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? We have long speeches, grand halls, and formal addresses. But the moment people remember is when a little dog decided to share a bench." He stood up and walked slowly toward the window, looking out over the same gardens where the moment had unfolded. Maybe that's a lesson in itself. Later that day, during a brief address to a small gathering at St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis chose to speak about animals, not politics, not policy, not current events, just the value of presence. Animals remind us of the simplicity of God's creation, he said. They come to us without pride, without fear, and without hidden intentions. Sometimes, in their quiet ways, they reflect the peace we forget we are capable of. The crowd listened closely. Some had seen the video. Others would soon. He ended the speech with a smile. If a little dog wandering into the Vatican gardens can remind the world to slow down and love without question, then perhaps he was sent here for a reason. The applause was gentle but heartfelt. And somewhere in Rome, that same dog was curled up in a sunny corner, unaware of the change it had sparked. As the story continued to circle the globe, the identity of the little dog became the subject of growing curiosity. Was it a stray? Had it escaped from somewhere nearby? Did it belong to someone important? The questions flooded social media platforms and news outlets alike. Reporters began calling animal shelters in Rome. Volunteers shared pictures of local strays, hoping to match one to the famous furry face. A few hopefuls claimed their pets had gone missing, but none resembled the dog in the video. Its scruffy coat, white paws, and uniquely bent left ear set it apart. It had no collar, no tags, and no obvious sense of where it belonged, except for the bench beside the Pope. Speculation only fueled the story further. Some began calling the dog Angelo, Italian for angel, noting its calm presence and the timing of its arrival. Others favored Fratello, meaning brother, in reference to Pope Francis's well-known love for St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals. The Vatican press office, flooded with inquiries, issued a rare light-hearted statement. We appreciate the world's interest in our unexpected visitor. While we do not currently know where he came from, we can confirm he made a lasting impression, and perhaps found a place in more than one heart. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Pope Francis asked a quiet favor. He requested that a few Vatican staff quietly look for the dog, not to claim ownership or make it a symbol, but simply to ensure it was safe and not left to wander the city alone. If he returns, the Pope said gently, I would like to see him again. The search wasn't loud or urgent. It was done with the same humility the Pope was known for: quiet inquiries, gentle steps through nearby parks, and polite questions to local vendors. On the fourth morning after the video surfaced, just as the sun was beginning to warm the cobblestones of Vatican City, a gardener spotted something familiar near the entrance to the lower courtyard. A small dog, scruffy as ever, was curled beneath a fig tree, head resting on his front paws, blinking sleepily at the morning light. The gardener knelt, extended a hand, and the dog stood up slowly, tail wagging. Within the hour, the dog was gently led back into the gardens, not as a guest or a mystery, but as someone returning home. Word reached the Pope before breakfast. He simply smiled and said, he came back. The little dog was waiting by the garden bench, just as he had been days before, sitting tall with his tail sweeping the ground in slow arcs. His coat still carried a bit of dust, and his ears flopped forward as if listening for a familiar voice. But there was something different now, a calmness, a comfort, as though he already knew he belonged. When Pope Francis entered the garden that morning, walking with his usual quiet steps, he didn't show surprise. Instead, he approached with a smile already forming. You've returned, he said gently. Then I suppose it wasn't chance after all. The dog barked once, soft, cheerful, and trotted up to meet him. From that day on, the dog became a quiet part of daily life at the Vatican. No grand announcement was made, no official title given, but the staff began calling him Leno, after the Latin word for gentle. He wandered freely through the gardens, occasionally appearing near the Pope's side during his walks, always calm, never disruptive. Lino never wore a leash or collar. He didn't need one. His place was not one of ownership, but of quiet companionship. And though he didn't speak a word, he brought a new kind of stillness to the Vatican, one that reminded those around him that peace often comes in the form of simple presence. Visitors who caught rare glimpses of him were always surprised. Is that the dog from the video? They would whisper. Some tried to take photos, but most just watched in awe, careful not to interrupt. Lino had become more than just a story, he was a symbol. One afternoon, during a small gathering of children in the Vatican courtyard, Lino surprised everyone by calmly lying at the Pope's feet as he read from a book of parables. The children giggled and reached to pet him, and Pope Francis smiled. He reminds us, the Pope said, looking down at Lino, that sometimes the world's greatest teachers don't speak at all. As weeks passed, the story of the stray dog and the Pope settled into a quiet legend. It was no longer about the viral video or the headlines. It was about a bond formed without expectation, in a place where titles and roles often overshadow the simple joy of connection. And in the heart of the Vatican gardens, beneath the pine tree and beside the old stone bench, that bond continued, quiet, faithful, and full of grace.